What if Mace Windu went to Kashyyyk Part 3? If you haven't seen Part 1 and 2, they will be linked in the description below. Palpatine had been on a mission to create the perfect apprentice. He has spent countless years collecting DNA samples from various Jedi, hoping to use their genetic material to create a powerful Sith warrior. But despite his efforts, all his attempts had failed, as the dark side required a special kind of vessel that could withstand its immense power. Palpatine's experiments were all but abandoned until he got his hands on the Chosen One himself, Anakin Skywalker. Using Anakin's DNA as the base, he began to experiment with different combinations of genetic material from other Force users, hoping to create the ultimate weapon. But as his twisted experiments continued, Palpatine's failed creations began to pile up. Some were horribly deformed and barely sentient, while others were consumed by madness and destroyed themselves in the frenzy of dark side energy. Yet, Palpatine continued on with his mad pursuit, convinced that he would eventually succeed. And then, finally, the perfect vessel emerged. Dubbed Starkiller, the creature was a terrifying image of power and strength, fueled by the dark side and controlled by Palpatine himself. He had finally created the ultimate weapon, one that could destroy the Jedi and conquer the galaxy once and for all. As the project name was revealed, a wave of terror swept through the galaxy. The mere thought of such a powerful and unstoppable force caused fear and panic to spread like a wildfire. Meanwhile, Padme had been living on Coruscant for several months now, ever since she agreed to Palpatine's demands. Every day felt like a battle as she tried to find ways to escape, gather allies, and free her beloved husband from prison. She knew it would not be easy, but Padme was determined, and with determination came hope. She called upon Sabe, her former body double, and together they devised a plan. The two women sat down in a secluded part of the city, surrounded by shadows, and discussed the details of their risky plan. Padme's voice was laced with concern when she asked, "Are you sure this will work?" Sabe's eyes glinted with determination. "I've done this before, Padme. Trust me, it will work." Her conviction was contagious, and Padme felt her own confidence rise. As they parted ways, Sabe's heart raced as she stepped out into the bustling streets of Coruscant. She had agreed to become Padme's body double for this plan, and the weight of the task was heavy on her shoulders. She knew that if anything went wrong, she would be responsible for Padme's capture, or even worse. The Imperial forces had been closely watching Padme for months now, but they had no reason to suspect that Sabe was anything more than a simple handmaiden. It was time to put their plan into action. Sabe walked through the crowded streets, feeling the weight of the Empire's eyes on her every move. She tried to stay calm and collected, just as Padme had taught her. Every step, every gesture, it had to be perfect. Meanwhile, Padme had made her way to the spaceport, keeping a low profile as she went. She had arranged for a ship to take her to a distant planet where she hoped to gather the help she needed to free her husband. As she boarded the ship, she couldn't help but worry about Sabe. Had their plan worked? Was Sabe able to distract the Imperial forces long enough for her to escape? She sat down and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The ship started to lift off, and Padme felt a glimmer of hope. But little did she know, Palpatine had been one step ahead of her the entire time. He wanted her to believe that her plan had worked, so she would feel free enough to meet with the people he sought to destroy. Palpatine had secretly tracked and followed her, waiting for the right moment to strike. As the ship flew through space, Padme started to relax, feeling more and more hopeful with each passing moment. She even allowed herself to doze off, her mind at ease for the first time in months. It wasn't until they landed on the remote planet that she received the news. Sabe had succeeded. The Empire had followed her every move, leaving Padme free to escape undetected, so she thought. Padme let out a sigh of relief, feeling gratitude for Sabe's bravery and sacrifice. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with Sabe's help, she had taken the first step towards saving her husband and ending the Empire's reign of terror. Padme, Ahsoka Tano, and Bail Organa met up to discuss the latest events. The three of them sat down around a small table, Padme frowning as she began to speak. "I have some news," she said, her voice low and tense. Anakin is being held captive on Coruscant. Bail leaned forward, his eyes wide with concern. What? By the Empire? Padme nodded, and Ahsoka sat silently, her fingers tapping nervously against the table. Bail shook his head. This is terrible news. We have to do something. Rex has told me that clone troopers are beginning to defect within the Empire. They are tired of serving the Empire and want to help us in our rebellion. Ahsoka raised an eyebrow. That's good news. Do you think we can work with them? Bail nodded. Rex has already placed some of these defectors as spies within the ranks of the Empire. With their help, we may be able to get more information about the Empire's plans and weaken them from within. Padme's eyes widened at the news. That's a brilliant idea. We must get Anakin out of there and work with these defectors to build our rebellion. Ahsoka listened carefully, mulling over the information that had been shared. She devised a plan. With the help of the clone spies, she could sneak into the holding area where Anakin was being held captive. Padme would recommend that she accommodate her in this mission, but Ahsoka was strongly against this notion. She leaned into Padme, whispering, "Your children could be the last hope for the Jedi. They are safe with Obi-Wan. They will need their mother." Leaning back, she looked at Padme with uncertainty on her face. Padme would agree, and from there, they would all split up. But, unbeknownst to the trio, their conversation had been monitored by an Imperial probe droid. They had been listening in and relaying the information back to the Empire. Ahsoka would sneak her way onto the planet of Coruscant. She moved quickly and stealthily through the darkened alleyways, her sense heightened as she tried to avoid detection. She had to find the clone who had promised to help her, and she had to do it before it was too late. Finally, she spotted the clone in question, standing in the shadows, waiting for her. He nodded to her, his eyes darting nervously around the deserted street. "Come on," he whispered, motioning for her to follow him. "We have to move quickly." They moved through the city, slipping through the shadows and trying to avoid the prying eyes of the Empire. The clone led her through a series of alleyways and back streets until they finally arrived at the prison where Anakin was being held. As planned, there was a clone squadron waiting for them to pretend to arrest Ahsoka, taking her to the prison so she could release Anakin. It was all going according to plan, too perfectly, in fact. They made their way to Anakin's cell, where he was released. As they made their way out, Anakin suddenly stopped in his tracks. His eyes narrowed in suspicion. "This way is wrong," he growled. "Something's not right." Ahsoka tried to reassure him, telling him that the clones were on their side, but Anakin wasn't buying it. He summoned one of Ahsoka's lightsabers and ignited it, ready to defend himself. Just as he did, the clone squad called for backup, revealing that their plan had been blown. Palpatine had executed the clones who were supposed to help Ahsoka and replaced them with his own loyal soldiers. Anakin sprang into action, striking down the clones with incredible speed and skill. Ahsoka could barely keep up, her own lightsaber twirling in her hands as they fought their way to freedom. As they escaped, they were met with no resistance. This was unsettling to both of them, and they moved cautiously through the darkened halls, knowing that danger lurked around every corner. Finally, they came to a complete stop as they saw a figure standing in front of them. The figure reeked of the dark side, and his presence was soul-crushing. Anakin stepped forward, his lightsaber at the ready. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure simply smiled. His eyes glittered with malevolence. "I am what you could have been," he said. Anakin and the Sith stood facing each other with a tense standoff. The air crackled with tension as they circled each other, their lightsabers glowing brightly in the darkness. Anakin could feel his heart racing as he tried to stay focused. He refused to let fear take over. He had to protect Ahsoka and make sure she made it out alive. The Sith seemed to sense his hesitation and sneered. "You are nothing, Jedi. You can't defeat me." Anakin gritted his teeth, determined to prove him wrong. He charged forward, swinging his lightsaber with all his might. The Sith parried his attack easily, his movements smooth and precise. As they continued to fight, Ahsoka suddenly appeared out of nowhere, her lightsaber in hand. She charged towards the Sith, her eyes blazing with determination. Anakin shouted for her to wait, but it was too late. The Sith quickly dodged her attack and then grabbed her with the Force, choking her. Anakin felt his blood run cold as he watched his friend struggle for breath. Ahsoka let out a whisper with her last breath. "Master, Help! Anakin felt a surge of anger and fear as he watched the Sith harm his apprentice. With a quick force push, he sent the Sith crashing through the wall, but the Sith was quick to recover, and soon they were facing each other again. Suddenly, a wave of force lightning came out of nowhere, illuminating the room in a blinding flash of blue. Anakin could barely see as the Sith lunged towards him, his lightsaber blazing. Anakin barely had time to react, but he managed to defend the attack. The Sith flipped over Anakin's head, using the Force to rip Ahsoka's lightsaber from her hand and throwing her a great distance out of view. Anakin was alone with the Sith now. He knew he had to fight with everything he had. The two of them continued their battle, their lightsabers clashing and sparking as they fought for their lives. The sound of clashing lightsabers filled the air as Anakin and the Sith fought with fierce intensity. Their movements were fast and precise, each one trying to gain the upper hand. The room illuminated with flashes of blue and red as the lightsabers clashed against each other. The sound of the blades hissing through the air was almost deafening, drowning out all other noise. Anakin was determined to protect his friends and defeat the Sith once and for all. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he continued to fight, his mind fully focused on the battle at hand. The Sith was just as determined, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. He fought with almost mechanical precision, his movements calculated and precise. Anakin was starting to feel the strain of battle, his arms growing heavy from the constant strain of deflecting the Sith attacks. He could feel his muscles burning as he tried to keep up with the Sith's relentless assault. Despite the odds against him, Anakin refused to give up. He was determined to protect everything and defeat the Sith, no matter what the cost was. As they continued to fight, Anakin could see the strain on the Sith's face. He was starting to grow tired, his movements becoming more sluggish. With a sudden burst of energy, Anakin lunged himself forward, swinging his lightsaber with all his might. The Sith tried to parry the attack, but he was too slow. Anakin's lightsaber struck true, slicing the Sith's chest, sending him tumbling to the ground. For a moment, Anakin stood there, his lightsaber still ignited, looking down at the fallen Sith. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their labored breathing. But before he could deliver the final strike, a loud noise echoed through the room. Anakin turned around, his lightsaber held at ready, to see several clone troopers rushing towards him, blasters blazing. Anakin knew he was outnumbered and outgunned. He had to gather Ahsoka and leave as quickly as possible. He sprinted over to where Ahsoka was laying, picking her up gently and slinging her over his shoulder. With a quick nod to the fallen Sith, Anakin turned and ran towards the exit, his lightsaber held at the ready. The clone troopers pursued him relentlessly, their blaster fire peppering the walls and the floors as Anakin and Ahsoka made their escape. They ran as fast as they could, dodging and weaving through the maze of corridors and rooms. At last, they burst out into the bright light of the open sky, gasping for breath. Anakin looked around, searching for a way to escape, but it was no use. The clone troopers had them surrounded. Anakin prepared himself for the battle, determined to go down fighting. But just as the clone troopers were about to open fire, a group of rebel clone troopers led by Commander Cody appeared, their blasters blazing. Anakin fought side by side with the new allies, taking out the clone troopers with fierce determination. When the smoke cleared, they stood victorious. But Cody would say, "We must leave now before it's too late."